Welcome to the Perinatal Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Christine, your host and certified perinatal mental health professional. This podcast is all about authentic conversations. We want to open up the discussions around perinatal health and well-being, from mood and anxiety disorders to breastfeeding to grief and loss in the perinatal period, and everything in between. While this is not therapy or medical advice, it is the place where we are going to continue to open up the discussion around all things perinatal mental, physical, emotional, and sexual health to help reduce stigma and break down these barriers to support. Hi, Chelsey. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
No problem. I'm so happy and excited that you wanted to share your story with us on the podcast. And today we're going to talk about your birth story and your experience, having your first and how that all went. And so I'm, really just honored and privileged that you wanted to share with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. So Chelsey, you tell me, where do you want to start?
Yeah, I guess we'll start at the beginning.
Sure.
So my husband and I were together for 10 years before we got married. So we knew that we wanted to start a family right away. We thought it would probably take a little while. So I was ready to go. And so we got married in September of 2019. And I found out I was pregnant on our honeymoon. So we were only married for 9 days and I was pregnant. So that was a big surprise. We were very, very grateful. We did not expect that to happen that quickly. And I had known for a long time that I wanted a midwife. I knew that I wanted, like a central care team. I wanted to know who, was going to deliver my baby. I wanted sort of like the, more holistic approach. So, it's the day I found I was pregnant, I started looking for a midwife in our area because I didn't know, sometimes there's wait lists. So I wanted to make sure that I had one. So I started looking for a midwife. And I found one that had openings. Obviously, I was 4 weeks pregnant at this point. So probably I was the first person for, a June due date. Yep. So, I signed up and we, booked the first appointment and I patiently waited for the first appointment. And so I got there and I was really nervous. I am a plus size person. So I was afraid that I may not qualify. And so I really wanted a midwife. And so I was really nervous that they might not take me despite being, healthy and not having any sort of health complications. So we had the first appointment and, they seemed fine. They said my health history was really boring, which is, for a midwife, that's kind of what you want, is to be really boring. So yeah. I was so relieved. I was so excited to get the kind of care that I wanted to have. So it was a big weight off my shoulders to know that that first step was, going the way that I wanted it to go. So the pregnancy was completely normal, so healthy, never had any issues. I felt really good, no issues whatsoever. They did some extra testing because of my size, which I was fine with. That was okay. I felt like that was just a precaution. That didn't bother me. Then, everything kind of took a turn when I was 28 weeks pregnant. COVID hit. So all of a sudden, everything just got flipped, completely opposite of how we thought it was going to go. Obviously, nobody expected that. So then I started to get really nervous about what could I expect in terms of hospital policies, because at that time we were hearing these horror stories of partners not being allowed in and all these awful things. So obviously your mind kind of spirals when you're about to do something, your life's about to change completely. You're about to do something you've never ever done before. And then you're being told you could possibly do it by yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. So
what was that like for you, thinking about your 28 weeks, 28, 30, whatever weeks, as you're starting to hear these stories, what did that feel like for you, thinking about that could be a possibility?
Yeah. That was the scariest thing. You'd never ever expect that to happen. That is not something my brain could even fathom would be possible for me. And the fact I was hearing it was happening to other people was terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely.
So at that point, they had switched some of my appointments to virtual. And so I remember asking on a virtual appointment, what can I expect? What are the current policies? I know it could change, but what can I try to prepare myself for? If it's worst case scenario, what can I expect? And then the midwife said, it's all going to be over. So you don't need to worry about it because it's going to be done.
Oh, wow.
and just like completely dismissed my concern and refused to answer. So at that point, I actually messaged the hospital on Facebook and said, "What are your policies?" And they gave me the policies, no problem. Like, no
Oh,
partners in triage right now. Once you're admitted, the partner can come in. Once they're in, they can't leave. So he
mhm.
can't leave the room. There's no wandering the halls. There's no going out for food. Once he's in the room, we'll feed him, but he stays. It's
Right.
pretty much what they said. So
Yeah.
at least my brain said, even if this changes, and maybe this does all end, at
Yeah.
least then I know exactly what to prepare for. And if I don't need that information, I'll throw it away. But at
Yeah.
least I have it, right?
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, the midwife just was adamant that it would be over and she just refused to answer that.
Wow.
So
Okay.
at that point, I had seriously, when I was dismissed like that, I had seriously considered looking for somebody else. But
Right.
my brain kind of told me that I was overreacting. And so I sort of pushed it aside, like, maybe they were just trying to reassure me, like, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But obviously, I wasn't wrong and it
No,
was not over.
no.
And so the information I had was good to have because it was information that, I needed.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, the pregnancy continues on as we try to like navigate the pandemic and like the risks of being pregnant in a pandemic. Like, we had no idea like what those risks could be. Right. So,
Right.
as we tried to like, I never went anywhere. Like, I didn't go into any stores. We didn't see anybody, nothing, because we just weren't sure like what the risk to me or like to our baby could be.
Right. Right. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And what was that like for you? Be-
I mean, it was very boring and super isolating. Like, I
Yeah.
just felt like it was like this should have been like the fun part of my pregnancy that I should be able to enjoy with like my friends and family, and like we just did it completely alone. So
Right.
that like definitely like I felt robbed of an experience.
Yes. And that is like, there's a lot of grief in that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Like grieving, like, this is not how I thought the end of my pregnancy would go, missing out on experiences that maybe you thought you might have. Like you said, being with friends and family. And we're not meant to have babies in isolation,
right.
right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, it definitely. I look back now and I'm like, there's so many things that are so easy and that we just take for granted that were just impossible to do.
Yes.
And so it was a time, I look back and I got a lot of time with my husband before our baby was born, and I'm grateful for that. But at
Yeah.
the same time, like, there's a lot of things that should have been celebrated that we just could not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, COVID continued, and as my due date got closer, I did all the things.
Hmm.
I did not want an overdue baby. I tried everything. Drank the tea, I did the curb walking, I bounced on my ball, I did literally everything I could think of because
Yeah.
I was like, I want this baby to come out early. I was like, if possible.
Right.
I'm
Okay.
not a patient person. So I was like, I just wanted to meet my baby. Like, at this point, we had spent, 12 weeks in isolation. And I was like, we just need something like I would like to not stare at the walls. I would like to have something to do.
Yes. Yeah.
So, as my due date got closer, I got more and more like, excited to meet my baby. And I was, despite everything going on, it just felt like it was going to be like the world's best distraction.
Right.
So, made it to my due date.
Okay.
And so I did not have the early baby I
Right.
wanted.
That you wanted. Right.
Clearly he was not on my timing.
No.
Um, so I got to my due date, and so I had an appointment that day, and I was like, really hoping I had made some progress. And I got there, and like I was, had made no progress at all. So I
Right.
remember leaving that appointment so defeated. Like, I was just so upset because I was like, you know, excuse me, how long am I going to have to wait, to meet my baby? Like, just
Yeah.
so defeated that I had tried all the things that are supposed to work and, none of it did.
No, I
So,
know. And like you said, they come on their own schedule, right?
oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And that was like lesson number one of parenting, that they don't really care what your schedule is.
No, they do not. And I say this all the time. I know people are probably sick of me saying this because I have teenagers now. And it's
Yeah.
like, I feel like parenting is just this long lesson of letting go of control, like learning how to let go of control from like conception to,
Oh, for sure.
probably the day we die, right? It's just constantly letting go of control, including, get this baby out and baby's not ready to come out yet.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Of
So, I left that appointment super defeated. And so I just spent the kind of the rest of the day moping, honestly. I was like really disappointed.
course.
After realizing that he was probably not going to make his appearance that day, around 10 o'clock, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go to bed. I'm tired. Like, let's just, get a good night's sleep. I
Yeah.
think I only laid down for like 5 minutes, maybe. And then all of a sudden I felt like this super like warm gush.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was like, there's no way that's pee. I didn't
No.
pee myself.
Yeah.
So I stood up and it was like a flood all over the floor.
Yep.
Like what's in the movies, they tell you it doesn't look like that. It did in my case. Like I
Right.
literally flooded the floor. And then
Wow.
I went running to the top of the stairs to like call down to my husband because he was in the basement and
Yeah.
literally splashed water all over the stairs.
Yes.
So
Yep.
he comes running up and I remember being so excited because like I was convinced it was definitely not going to be that day, right? So then I was, my baby, he understood the assignment. He was like, "Okay, mom, you want me to come? Here we go." So
Yeah.
so
Oh,
yeah, so I remember so I called the midwife's pager and she basically said, and I was so excited. She was like, "Okay, now you can go to bed." And I was like, "Wow, that is
wow.
so not exciting." But
No.
basically, it was 10:30 at that point and she's like, "Get some rest because, there's no point in like exhausting yourself in early labor."
Yeah.
So we sort of came down from the excitement of that and I, went to bed. I had a little bit of like low back pain, but like nothing that was really like painful in any way. So I
Right.
went to bed and I slept right through and that was probably one of the best sleeps I got that entire pregnancy. So
Wow.
I
Good for
slept right
you.
through and I woke up in the morning still like really like not a lot happening, just like a little bit of low back pain, but like nothing I could even identify as a contraction, honestly.
Right.
So in the morning, the midwife called to check in, and right away she's like, "We need an induction," and I was like, "Oh, okay." So I was like, "All right." So
And
yeah,
can I ask you, did she give you an explanation of why you needed an induction?
she didn't really explain. I suspect it's because my water was broken and I wasn't having contractions, so she was concerned about infection.
Right.
So and I think because I had an appointment that day, like his head was pretty high, so I think she was concerned about like how long my water would be broken without anything happening.
Right. Okay. Which
Yeah.
makes sense. And I understand that only because I've had 3 kids.
Right.
But, if we haven't had that experience or it's our first baby or whatever, we might not necessarily know that. And that's just why I was asking, because so many times, like, we're not explained interventions, ideas and things that they're thinking about. And like, we don't get the explanation, but we're the patients. Like, this involves us, right? And I think that can lead to a lot of anxiety sometimes. I'm not saying for you necessarily, but like for people, right? Like that can lead to anxiety or, what's going on, confusion, and not being able to make a truly informed decision, right? Of knowing the whole, like of understanding the whole reasoning behind the procedure. If we don't know that, then we're not really making an informed decision.
Yeah, so I feel like this became a theme where there really was no informed decision making. It was just kind of, obviously as a first time mom, you're told that you don't know anything. So I didn't want to go against medical advice, but I think it's important that it doesn't matter if you've never had a baby, you still know your body better than anybody. So it doesn't matter if this is your first baby or your 14th. It doesn't matter.
Yes, thank you so much for saying that, Chelsey. I agree wholeheartedly with you. And we are told that over and over and over, like, well, you
Right.
don't know because it's your first baby. I was told that
Yeah.
baby was crowning, ready. I was ready to push, and I was told, no, you're not. And then they checked me and they're like, oh yeah, there's the baby.
Wow, thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I could tell there was a baby there. Uh,
Yeah.
because I've not experienced that and it feels pretty different,
Right.
you know.
Exactly. And the same goes for parenting, honestly. Like, maybe this is your first time, but nobody knows your baby better than you. And I
That's
think you can go into pregnancy with the exact same mindset. Um, yeah, so I didn't want to go against medical advice. So, at that point I was like, well, this is the professional, right? So I will trust her. And, I was fine with that. I was like, okay, so we'll get ready for an induction. So at that point it was about 7:30 when she called. And so she said, meet me at the hospital for 8:45. So she said, have some breakfast. and then meet me there. So we get there at 8:45. My husband has to wait in the car because he's not allowed in triage because of COVID.
Right.
So because I'm not admitted, he can't come in until I'm admitted.
Right.
So she told Sarah to meet us there at 8:45. So it's 10:30, 10:45 before she shows up. So I did not hear from her. I did not know why she wasn't there, but she just was late for whatever reason.
Right.
So she comes in. I don't get an apology or anything. She just was late for whatever reason. So at this point, it has been so long that my husband actually drove home to go to the bathroom because he sat in the car for so long.
Right. Yeah. He couldn't come in.
No, so I was there by myself. So when I get there, they hook me up to the monitors. I am actually having contractions. I just don't really feel them.
Yep.
So, she confirms that my water had broken and I didn't just pee myself, which I know I didn't, but they do have to check that. So,
yeah.
She confirmed it was my water. And then she says, so, I double checked your chart and, they wrote down your BMI wrong. So I don't think I can deliver your baby.
Pardon?
Yes. And we're talking about my pre-pregnancy BMI, right? So we're talking about a number from 10 months earlier at this point. So she says, I don't think I can deliver your baby. And I remember thinking,
and I'm sorry, Chelsey, I just want to clarify. This is your midwife that said
yes.
this.
Yes.
Oh, wow. So how did you react to that?
I remember thinking that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Like, I already have a problem with BMI. It's a number that doesn't say anything about me. Like, I've said already that the pregnancy was completely healthy. I had not one complication at all. So you're using a number that was at pre-pregnancy, so a number that's currently not relevant, a number that doesn't say anything about me versus actual health history from the last 10 months that you have in front of you to use. Like, something is not right there.
Wow.
So I was like, I'm confused. I don't think I understand. So she brings in the OB and the OB says, well, it's not a total disaster. And I was like, I like now knowing I'm like, birth is so much mental. No wonder why this whole process took so long if that's how we're beginning. Yeah. Like, I was like, we don't talk about people's bodies and like it's some kind of failure. Like,
yes. Of course. And especially when you are going into like labor and delivery.
The most vulnerable thing.
The most vulnerable. Absolutely, Chelsey.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So I was, and then, I'm doing this by myself because my husband is not allowed in yet. So I was kind of stunned that this was really what we were going for. So, and then the midwife asked the OB and she says, well, can I deliver this baby? And the OB looked at her and was like, yeah, like, isn't that your job? Like, why wouldn't you be able to? Like, so they make up their plan of what they're gonna, what their approach is. And so then, finally they decide I'm going to be admitted. So they tell my husband he can come in, bring everything you need with you because you're not going to be allowed back out to the car until, it's time to go home. So he brings everything with him. We go up to labor and delivery and they sort of start. So they decided they were going to put me on Pitocin and just sort of see how it went. I think because my water was already broken, I had like limited options of what they could sort of do because they're concerned about infection, obviously. Yeah. So some other options that they would do to maybe like before jumping to Pitocin, they won't necessarily try it first.
Right. Okay.
So they start the Pitocin and like right away, the contractions are on top of each other from 1 centimeter. So from 1 centimeter, there was no break in between and it was all in my back. So the thing is too with, being induced, they want you on the monitors. So then I was forced to lay on my back and I couldn't move at all. So that makes back labor incredibly painful. Like back labor is painful anyway, but then not being able to take the pressure off your back or move the baby off your spine makes it so much harder.
Yes. Yes. And so even thinking about that as an intervention, right? Like, the ability to move around being taken away from you, did you like realize that in the moment, or were you just in it because you were in so much pain, or were you like, oh, I wish this could be different or move around? Or
that was really my only preference, was to be able to move around. Like they never had me go over to make a birth plan or birth preferences. Like we never did any of that, but that was the only thing I asked for. And then right away, immediately it was gone.
And so like how did that feel for you, like mentally?
Well, I don't think I expected it to take as long as it ended up taking, but I felt like the tools I had sort of prepared myself for and like what I had learned in like my birth classes, I couldn't use any of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And that's so hard, like when you're again like going into this experience, a very vulnerable experience. And I always say like labor like plays mind tricks on you. Like
Yeah.
there's most of the time I was like, okay, I can do this. But then it's like when I went through like that transition and I was like, I can't do this. I cannot do this. This is not a thing. I cannot push a child out of my vagina. Someone please help me. Like I can't. This is not going to happen.
Yeah.
You know?
I felt like, despite everything that was happening, like I know that my body is strong and I felt confident that I could do this, but
Yeah.
there were a lot of doubts in the room.
Yeah.
Like, you could hear them sort of talking about C-section in the corner, and like my husband kept saying, like, no, like she can do this. Like, let's, not jump towards something that we don't need, right?
Right.
So basically, like I said, I had to be like on the monitors, and
Yeah.
like right from the beginning my midwife was like really struggling with the monitors. Like she couldn't keep track of the baby and she kept struggling with like how to position the monitors, and so the nurses were like in and out of my room constantly helping her, and every time they would come in the room they would sort of bicker back and forth. Like they would say something to her about how like how much she was struggling, and then they like it was very uncomfortable, extremely
Oh,
uncomfortable,
gee.
because they were sort of arguing back and forth, and that's the last thing you need when you're trying to deliver a baby is somebody arguing. And also when it's basically about how incompetent your care provider is, like that is scary.
That's so scary. Again, we're not meant to have babies in isolation. And like, this is, the team that you have around you, right? And then feeling this, like, you know, maybe lack of trust or kind of doubt in their ability. That's not very comforting.
Right. And I look at even like in nature, like animals will wait till they're safe to give birth.
Absolutely.
Like animals don't want to give birth like while they don't feel like they're in a secure space. So I'm like, no wonder like this was so hard.
Yes.
Yeah. Just with, with all that going on in the background, like, yeah, I feel like with all that going on and like not really feeling like I was able to like trust my midwife, I went into complete freeze mode. Like I was completely unable to advocate for myself at all.
Yeah.
And like my husband obviously has never seen me like that before. So
Right.
he did not know what to do at all because that is not something that we anticipated, right?
Right. Right.
So I became completely unable to speak for myself. And with having midwifery care, the nice thing is that the midwife stays in your room. But in
Right.
our case, the not nice thing is that the midwife was in our
In
room.
your room.
So I like wanted to tell my husband to like please get rid of her, get rid of her. But like
You
how do
can.
I do that in like a nice way? And like my brain was like completely like shut off from like what my options were.
Right. And how do you feel about the fact that you went into freeze mode?
It's definitely scary. I think it's hard for me to process because looking back, when you look at it from an outside perspective, I'm like, why didn't I just say something? But like, I know that I was unable. Like, it's not like I chose not to. I just couldn't.
That's right.
So, but you wish that when you're looking back on it from an outside perspective, that you wish I'm just screaming at her to say something.
Yes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
the reason why I asked Chelsey is because that's like from whatever reactions we have in labor and delivery, like so many times that's what people think about it, right? Like, I wish
Yeah.
I had said something. I wish I'd done something different. I'm a very vocal person,
Yeah.
which I know can be shocking to people who listen to this podcast on the regular. But with people in power, like doctors or care providers, I go into fawn response. And so I go like, okay, yeah, uh-huh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, without like questioning them. I've gotten much better now, but without questioning them. And we see that often in labor and delivery, again, because they're in power and we want to make sure like they're on our side to take care of us, right?
And I think as women, we're already conditioned to do that.
You got it.
Yeah.
Absolutely 100%. That is a major factor into it. And so, but then there's like, oh my God, why didn't I say anything? I'm usually such a loudmouth. Like, why,
Right.
why wouldn't I talk? Right. And so then that can feel, really shitty that, we've acted in a way that's not necessarily us. But I want to normalize for anyone who's listening, I mean, and for you too, Chelsey, but like your nervous system chose the freeze response because it felt like that was the safest thing to do in that moment, right? That wasn't a conscious decision, like, okay, I'm going to freeze now and not be able to talk, right? So for anyone who's had a similar experience, like that is not a choice that you're making consciously. That's your body, your nervous system saying, okay, we're in danger. There's danger here. I'm not safe. We got to freeze to survive.
Right. And I think that's one of the biggest things I've had to process through is that I did not do anything wrong. Like none of this is my fault. Like I was deserving of good care, regardless of how I responded or didn't respond.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You did deserve that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I labored like that, like, with the contractions on top of each other for about like 8 hours. So like and so the midwife said, I think we're going to be here a long time. So she's like, you should get the epidural because we're going to be here a long time. And I'm concerned that you're going to get tired. So at that point, I was looking for some kind of relief. Like I was like, okay, I had tried the morphine, which I didn't like at all. That just didn't make me feel good. And it doesn't really do anything for pain anyway.
Yeah.
So I agreed. And so I was very lucky that the anesthesiologist was literally right there. So from the time I said yes to the epidural, it was probably like 30 seconds and he was in my room.
Oh, that's good.
So I got the epidural and at first it didn't work. Like I still felt so much pressure and I was still in a lot of pain. So I said something that, I was still where I was feeling pain. And so they upped it, but then it was so high.
Yes.
So then I couldn't even move my legs at all. Like I couldn't even turn over because my legs were so heavy. So I couldn't feel anything, which I mean, is great. Then you don't feel the pain. But at the same time, I like literally had no function of my lower half at all.
Right. Right. And how can I just like on a personal level, like, can I just ask you, how did that feel for you? What was that like for you? Because I experienced the same thing. So I'm curious to know what that felt like.
I didn't like that feeling. I didn't like that I couldn't move. It felt like I didn't like obviously I was on the monitors anyway, but I couldn't even roll over without somebody helping me. And like that feeling of being so helpless, like I did not like that at all. Like that did not make me feel like empowered and strong. Like that made me feel like weak.
Right.
So I did not like that feeling.
Yeah.
But like I said, because I was in freeze, like I just couldn't ask anybody to just turn it down.
Right.
And I think at that point I would have taken like a little bit of pain to be able to have some of my feeling back.
To feel. Yeah. Yeah. I felt the same. And it, like, it felt so weird to me, like physically. And then I started panicking because I could still feel like different things in my body.
Right.
Like not painful, but just things. And then the nurse was like, you are still in labor. Like things are still happening, even though you can't feel it. And I was like, oh, right. Like it just felt so, I was like, there's something wrong. There's
a disconnect.
Something. Yes. It's a weird disconnect. And I felt so connected to my body up until that point that it was like, my brain just could not process it. So I did feel more comfortable once it started wearing off and I could feel more. Yeah.
Yeah. So by that point, like by the time I got that, it was, pretty close to bedtime. So we just agreed that, we would all try to get some rest and see what happened overnight. So nothing really eventful happened overnight. Like I continued to progress, like slowly, but progress. And the baby was fine. He tolerated everything fine. So we got to morning and I think I was like 6 once the morning came. So like this was like very slow.
Wow.
So at this point, like I went into labor at 10 o'clock on June 2nd and now we're the morning of June 4th. So, so it was going slowly, but steady, like we were getting somewhere. There was only one point in the labor where anything like there was even like a little bit complicated. At one point, his heart rate dipped a little bit. So the midwife wanted me to like turn over to see if that would help him. But like, obviously, like I said, that epidural was so high, I needed help to do that.
Yeah.
And so, my husband helped me turn over. And then she said that wasn't really helping him. But then she just stared at me. And I was like looking for her to like give me a next step about like what I could try. She just looked at me like I was supposed to know what to do next. And I was like, I am not the expert here. Like you are not me. I do not know what to do next. You just told me my baby's heart rate is dipping and then you're just looking at me. Like,
oh my gosh. That
I was like,
scary.
Yeah, like I don't know, like maybe I am naive because I feel like I wasn't like concerned, but at the same time, I was like alarmed that, you're concerned, but you're not like, I'm
That's
looking at you for guidance.
that's right. Yeah, that's what I mean, like in terms of scary, of like not necessarily the heart rate piece, but like you're telling me there's an issue and then you're looking at me to figure it out.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then after that point, the nurses came in, and like I said, they had been sort of like bickering with her like this whole time about, her, using the monitors and whatever. So at that point they came in and said, we're just going to transfer your care. It's not going to be under her anymore. So they said, we're going to transfer you to the OB.
Okay. And how did you
So
feel about that at that point?
like I said, I had really wanted a midwife so I would know who was delivering my baby. But
Mhm.
at that point, I was so frustrated with how it went. I just didn't care. I was like, I just want somebody who I feel is competent to deliver my baby. So at
Right.
that point, it didn't really bother me because
Right.
it wasn't like I didn't feel attached to having her deliver my baby at that point after everything we had gone through.
Mhm.
Um, so I was fine with that. So I continued laboring all morning. And after 36 hours of labor, I finally reached 10 centimeters.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And how did you feel when they were like, okay, you're at 10 centimeters? What was that like?
Well, I was kind of expecting to like, okay, we're gonna, have a baby in the next hour. And they were
Right.
like, oh, well, you can labor down for an hour because his head is still really high. So they're like, you can. So I was like so excited and like hyped up that this was finally gonna be over. And then I'm like, well, you can just, sit and wait. So I like literally sat for that whole hour and like watched the clock because I was like, I'm ready to meet my baby.
Yes. Yeah. And not be in labor.
Yeah. So
Wow.
finally, I labored down for an hour. I don't think his head really came down much more. So it was kind of just, so they were kind of like, well, I guess we'll just like, try and see how it goes. Right.
Right.
So, I started to push, but the epidural was so high that I couldn't feel my contractions at all. So I didn't really know when to push.
Right.
So at this point, the midwife had returned because she could still attend the delivery, even if she's not going to be like, even if you're transferred to OB, the midwife will often still attend.
Right.
Um, so she came back and I explained that I couldn't feel any contractions and asked her if she could help me by watching the monitor. Just let me
Mhm.
know like when it was starting so that I could try to time my pushing with the contractions to make it the most effective.
Right.
And she said, well, I don't know when you're having a contraction. And I was like, I'm asking you to look at the monitor. And she was like, and so then she kept asking me, well, are you having one? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. And like
Uh,
this was like a repeated thing she kept asking me. And finally, I just started pushing whenever because I got so frustrated because I was like, I'm asking you to help me with something that should be, I think, pretty straightforward. And she's saying, well, I don't know. I don't know. So I was like, I'm telling you, I cannot feel anything. I'm just asking you to watch the monitor and let me know, like,
uh,
when it looks like it's about to start.
wow. And were there nurses as well
Yeah.
as the OB? Yeah. And were the nurses not telling you that? You
I had it was the problem was because I was in labor so long, I had so many different nurses. And so
right.
like each one has their own sort of, approach and one would come in and like she would like poke the top of my baby's head and then the next one would come in and then she would say, "Oh, he really doesn't like that. We shouldn't do that." And so I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, I was like, this is stressful.
Uh,
So I just started pushing like whenever because I didn't know when I was having contraction and apparently nobody could help me with, sort of guiding that. And I had done like a lot of research on like how to push to like, sort of, the most effective ways to push. But when I tried that, like I wasn't getting feedback that was effective. So I ended up just pushing with my face, which is exactly what I didn't want to do.
oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the time like he was born, all my blood vessels in my face were all broken from pushing so hard.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
yeah. So it ended up being I pushed for just over 3 hours with him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Chelsey.
So it was quite a marathon after, 37 hours of labor
Of
and then
labor.
also, 3 hours of basically trying to work. I couldn't work with my body because the epidural was so high that
Right.
we could not work together at all. So it was just my own like brute strength pretty much. Like,
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so do you feel that the way that the midwife was or wasn't communicating with you, the nurses weren't communicating to tell you when you were pushing or when you were having a contraction?
right.
Like, I know this is a silly question, but I want to know from you, do you feel like that contributed to a longer time of pushing?
Oh, well, completely. because if you're not pushing with a contraction, like you need your body to also be pushing. Like it's,
Yeah.
it's not just, you have to work together. Like, and honestly, as much as you can push, like now knowing what I know and having another baby, like I, your body should be ready to do most of it. Like
Yeah.
it shouldn't be that much on your end.
Yeah.
Like I think that, his head was still really high, but I had been there so long, they're like, well, let's just get this going. And I think I pushed for so long to bring him down, which my body with time should have done anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as much as I wouldn't have liked it in that moment, I I probably should have waited a little longer. Like I think the 1 hour time frame just wasn't enough for him. Like he was just not ready.
Right. He was just chilling.
Right.
Yeah. He was like,
Yeah.
no, I've come this far, but like I just need a bit more time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And so in the moment, like I know it depends. Like it can feel like it's fast, even if it's really long, or it can feel like really slow and torturous. Like, so for you in the moment, like that 3 hours, did it feel like 3 hours? Did it feel like, oh my God? Like, how did that feel for you?
I don't remember it feeling that long. Like I don't
Okay.
remember it feeling like it was that long, but I remember how physically exhausting it was, like to go on for that long, like
Yeah.
with, really just, you know, like I said, brute strength, like really not having, like not being able to work
Yeah.
towards, like, work with my body.
Yeah.
And I remember asking for a mirror because I wanted to be able to see.
Yeah.
So in hopes that that would help me like push effectively. And they're like, well, we don't have any mirrors. So I used my phone. My husband held my phone and I watched so I could
Yeah.
see if what was working and what wasn't.
Right. It sounds
Yeah.
like you were really trying, Chelsey, to like get all the help you could get.
Right. And I was trying with, the like little resources I felt I had at that point to like do anything to like try to make this, better.
Right, right. And did they not, obviously they didn't, but I'm just thinking again, we always relate to our own stories, right?
Yeah.
But I remember the nurses again, like with my first, because it was my first epidural. And so, yeah, I wasn't really feeling a lot of contractions, but they turned the monitor towards me and showed me like, this is what it looks like when you're having a contraction.
Right.
So I could see that. So I'd be like, oh, I'm having a contraction.
No,
Obviously,
I
no
didn't.
one did
No,
that for me.
nobody sort of offered me that. And because I was like, my epidural was so high, like I had like limited motion and sort of what I could do. And, I
Right.
was pushing like, on my back in the stirrups, which I didn't really want. Like,
Yeah.
I consider myself to be like, a researcher by nature. So I had like, done so much research about like about what I wanted. But I also think that, going back to being, plus size, I was just so afraid to ask for anything. Like I just wanted to be like, as easy as I could be. And now looking back, that is just not my approach at all. And when I went on to have my second baby, that was not how I went into it at all.
Right.
It was not about being the most easy patient they'll see that day. That is not my responsibility.
And that again is like part of that fawn response, right? Of like,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna like kind of lay down and like be quiet and be, soft and not cause any trouble and make sure that, I'm just gonna go with what they say because they know best and they're taking care of me. And I don't want to get on their bad side because like I need their help in the most vulnerable situation I could ever be in.
Exactly.
Right.
100%. That's exactly my approach. And, looking back, I'm like, this could have went so differently if I had, if that wasn't my approach, which I know that in that instance, that was not my, I didn't choose that. That is just how, the way that my brain went. Um,
Exactly. Exactly. And so how did you feel afterwards when he arrived?
yeah. So, finally, after 3 hours of pushing, they had sort of talked about, maybe forceps or vacuum. And I was like, I just don't want that. So I pushed as hard as I could. And, at 2:23 p.m., he was born and
Right.
he was, perfect and so healthy.
Yeah.
And I felt like, the worst part was over. Like I felt like we had done it and
Right.
my baby was here. Like, those months of waiting and like all those months of isolation, like they were all worth it.
Right.
Yeah. So he was just
Wow.
perfect. And like he was so little. I remember saying he's so tiny because
Yeah.
for some reason I just thought he was going to be big. But he was, 7 pounds, 6 ounces, like very average, just like a
Yeah.
long, skinny bean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And can I ask why you felt like he was going to be big? Just because you felt
Right.
like
I
he was.
had I had the midwife. She kept saying he's going to be big. He's going to be big. But I just don't know if that was because of my size. And I remember saying to her, well, my mom is a plus size lady and she never had any big babies. So I am confident that he's not going to be big.
Right.
But she kept saying, I think he's going to be big. At like 37 weeks, they were like, oh, he's already over 8 pounds. And I was like, that would be surprising. I mean, it's possible, but I thought it would be surprising.
Right. Right. And was that like when she measured you, she said that?
Yeah, or like I had a few ultrasounds too, and they thought maybe he would be big.
Right.
So
Okay. And
yeah.
yeah, I had an ultrasound right before my first was born, and they were bang on, like by like 1 ounce they were
Oh
off.
my goodness, that's
Yeah.
so uncommon.
So uncommon.
Yeah.
And then other ultrasounds where they were like totally off by like 2 pounds.
Yes. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so it's really like hit or miss. But that's why I asked you of like,
Yeah.
so really you didn't think you'd have a big baby. It was
No.
the midwife who
Yeah.
told you she thought you would have a big baby. So you
Yeah.
were surprised when he came out because she
Yeah.
was telling you this over and over.
Right. And she was kind of talking about, even before I reached my due date, like, the baby's big, so, we might want to do an induction, which at that time like I said, I didn't want to go against medical advice, so I would have done. But in my second birth, I did not listen to
Right.
that.
Right. And so I think that is important to note, right? Is just that like, because again, if by them saying like baby's going to be big, baby's going to be big, and if that perception is coming from because you're a big girl and
Right.
you're a plus size girl and so that's what they're taking it from, like that's not fair because then also that can lead to interventions like, well, let's induce you because we think baby's going to be big because you're big. Like
Exactly.
that's not
Exactly.
okay, right?
Yep.
Because again, we see inductions can, lead to a lot more interventions and things not going the way that they could go or that we, hope they go, right?
Right. And I am not against induction. I think inductions are amazing for when they're medically necessary
Yeah.
or for people who choose them.
Yeah.
I think if
Absolutely.
that is what you want and that makes you feel, safe in choosing for your birth, I think 100% more power to you.
Yeah.
But I think when they're used just, as a way to, um, like I think sometimes they're used by providers to, control over the timing of a birth. And, I looking back, I don't, necessarily agree with that. Like in my case, did we maybe rush an induction? Maybe she could have given me some tools at home, right? That I could have done to sort of get labor going on my own.
Right.
But I can't change it. So, that
No,
was the way
no.
he was meant to come into the world, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for your, and I, sorry, and I didn't mean like in terms of your
Oh,
story.
no, no.
Yeah. And I was induced twice.
Yeah.
Well, supposed to be the second one, my second baby, because my first he was big, he was over 9 pounds. And so the second one looked like we were scared.
Yeah.
I mean, he was 10'4", so he was a big boy.
Oh,
Um,
my.
yeah, it's okay. Everything went okay. It was all good. Honestly, it was all good. But I was supposed to be induced. I got to the hospital and I was already in labor. So that worked out. But I was induced for my third because we were nervous that like I would go into labor quickly because I went quick with my second one and then the third one just decided to take his sweet time. So totally I'm not against induction either, but it's that whole concept of like an informed decision, right? If we're making this decision based on facts, as opposed to like, well, we think your baby will be big because you're a big girl. Like that's not fair. I don't think. Hello, I just wanted to let you know that Chelsey's microphone cuts out from here, so you will hear a difference in audio for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think, it's hard to know, in my ultrasound, like what they saw, but, he was obviously not big. So can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Yeah, so obviously he wasn't big. So when he came out, I was like, he's so tiny.
Yes.
I don't know, I guess I'm surprised because, even though I didn't feel like he was that big, obviously they did. So they were the experts, not me, right?
Right. Yeah. Like, I don't know I shouldn't listen to my own body.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, he came out and he was perfect and he looked great. And, I didn't have any, complications at that point. Everything looked good. So
Yeah.
they just, let us, have a little bit of time. And then we, got wheeled up to the postpartum ward.
Yeah.
So then we were just sort of, bonding as a family of three. And just, I was trying to like, come down from that experience.
Yes.
I don't think at that point I had even begun to even process like what had just happened.
Right.
At that point, I was just like so focused on our baby. And I was trying to like, learn how to breastfeed and because that was something I wanted to do if it was possible. So I was like, trying to work on that. And we were, trying to learn how to like swaddle him and like,
Yeah.
just all the like new parent things.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Absolutely.
yeah.
And
So
how were you
yeah.
feeling physically, like when the epidural was wearing off and did wear off? How did you feel physically?
I was tired, like really tired, but I felt good. Like I didn't feel
Yeah.
like really like excessively sore at that point. Like I really felt okay. Like I think considering like what a marathon that was, like
Yeah.
I felt really good. Like I was, happy not to be pregnant anymore at that point. Like
Yes.
so, especially if anybody who's been overdue, like how what that feels like.
Yes, yes. I was overdue a week when mine
Yes.
was born, and yeah, I was just so done. But then after, like bringing him home and realizing how scary it is to actually take care of a little tiny human, that I was like, oh my God, I just need to put him back for like a week.
Yes,
I don't know
exactly.
what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, so everything was fine. And then about 7 hours postpartum. So I would have been like it would have been like 9:30, somewhere in that range. I got
Yeah.
up to go to the bathroom and on my way back from the bathroom, all of a sudden I just felt this gush and I started bleeding out onto the floor.
Oh gosh. Okay.
So it was I that was scary.
Oh,
In most of my birth, I never really felt scared despite everything going on.
yeah.
But in that moment, I was definitely scared. Um,
Right.
so I paged the nurses and like all of this like so blurry because it happened so quickly, but all of a sudden like all these nurses were in my room and the OB came like running in. And because it was so many hours after birth, like I had no IV or anything anymore. So they restarted an IV. I had to have a catheter put back in, which after you've
Mm.
had a baby, that's the last thing you want.
No, so uncomfortable.
So they restarted an IV to put me back on Pitocin to try to get like, things so that my bleeding would stop.
Yeah.
Um, and the OB was like trying to, stop the bleeding. And while this is happening, our baby had his first poop. So my husband is trying to change his like that sticky meconium
Yes,
poop.
black tar. Yep.
Yes. So he's trying to clean that while trying not to faint because, I'm,
Oh,
obviously like I'm hemorrhaging. Um,
yes.
so
Yeah.
that was really scary.
I bet.
So they did manage to get my, bleeding to stop. But, then because I had a catheter and IV, then like, well, now I'm back to the bed again. So I've just spent, 28 hours in a hospital bed. And then they're like, we need to keep the catheter in so you can't get up.
Yeah.
So then I
Oh,
couldn't do anything for myself again. Right. So now
yeah.
I'm back to like that helpless feeling
Yeah.
where I need my husband to pick up my baby because I can't get out of the bed because
Yeah.
of all of like the wires and the catheter and all that.
Yeah.
So, we tried to get him sleep. Obviously, there wasn't much that night, as there's not with a brand new baby, but especially not with like after that. Um, I think
Experience.
both of us needed to like really process what had just happened because that was definitely the scariest part of it.
I bet. And did the OB like explain to you like what happened? Like, obviously they don't maybe know why, but did they just explain to you like you're hemorrhaging or, this is what's going on?
Um, Nobody really explained, but I kind of knew what was happening.
Right.
Like I had done enough, research ahead of time that I kind of had an idea what was happening.
Right.
Um, so they had sort of, they were, I will give them like credit. My husband looked really pale. And so they went over there and one of the nurses like brought him juice and like sat him down because they were like concerned he was going to faint from,
Yeah.
witnessing that.
Yeah.
So they were really good at explaining to him that like I was okay and that like I was going to be okay. They just
Right.
needed to put some precautions in place to make sure that like my bleeding stopped.
Stopped. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So that was, right around bedtime. So after that we sort of said, okay, let's just like relax. Like we need to just
True.
chill out for the rest of the night. Like that was a really scary experience.
Yeah.
Um, and so the next morning, the midwife, because your care gets transferred back. So
Right.
the next morning, she came in to sort of like do her rounds and like check on us. And she comes in and she's like, "Oh, so like, how was your night?" And I just like looked at her and I was like, "Did you read my chart?" And
Mm,
she was like, "No." And I was like, "Well, I had a hemorrhage, so like my night wasn't great." Like,
right. Like
yeah,
just not being informed, just coming on in and
yeah.
oh,
And then she says, "Yeah, I knew that would happen to you, but I was tired, so I just went home."
I'm sorry. She did say that to you out loud?
Yes, yes. She said, I knew that would happen to you, but I was tired, so I just went home.
And how did you react to that?
I remember looking over at my husband and going, did she really say that out loud? Is
Right.
that what she meant the way that she said it? Did she
Right.
actually mean that? Yeah. And
And
I was stunned. Like I couldn't believe that. Like
what do you
I
say to
couldn't
that?
believe that somebody could be so like negligent that they actually let me experience the worst thing that ever happened to me.
Right. So what came of that conversation? Did you say anything to her? Like how did that
I
conversation?
think I just stared at her in complete disbelief that somebody would actually say that to me. And like I think my brain was trying to process if that's what she actually meant. Like,
Right, right. Yeah, is this real?
yeah, I think like so because it was the OB that delivered the baby, I think what she was getting at is maybe I should have been given some additional medications because of how long my labor was. Because the longer your labor is, and like the more interventions they give you, that ups your chance for hemorrhage, right? So
Right.
I think that's what she was getting at. But like I was stunned that she chose not to advocate for me at all. Like that is your job. Like I don't care who's delivering my baby and like what your power dynamic is. Like if you think you're under the OB or whatever, it was your responsibility. Like
Right.
you're the one who knows my history. You're the one who's been here for most of this birth. So
Right.
it was her responsibility to be a part of my care.
Right. And that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was part of what went into looking for a midwife is like being able to have someone on your care team that will advocate for you, that's more involved than, an OB might be.
Exactly.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
And that's what
exactly.
you
And that's
got.
what I was looking for. I wanted that connection with the person who would be delivering my baby. I wanted a person who spent the last 10 months with me and knows, sort of what we're looking for and what is important to us as a family.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And so then also having to continue like the aftercare with her. I know I'm jumping a bit, but like what was that like for you that like was it her specifically that you dealt with like postpartum? Was it up to 6 weeks or what was that like?
Yeah, so once I was cleared, so they wanted us to stay for 24 hours just because I had had that hemorrhage.
Yeah.
So at 24 hours, they said, they did his testing, everything came back, so they said, you're free to go. So we sort of packed everything up to leave, and she had told us that we needed to stop on the way home and buy a baby scale, and I was like, okay, it's COVID, there's no stores that are open and this was not something I'd ever heard of before. So I was very confused. Like, if this was something I needed to have, why didn't I find out about it, like,
Sure.
in one of my appointments so I could have, prepared in advance? But she
Right.
was like, you need to get a baby scale. And I was like, well, I'm not taking my newborn into a store, like in the
Right.
height of COVID. I'm just not. So we
Right.
like sent my mother-in-law on like a wild goose chase to like look for a baby scale on Facebook Marketplace
Right. And did she say why? Like what did she want you to do with the scale?
to weigh him. I think she was trying so that she wouldn't have to come for home appointments.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah, so I think she wanted us to call and us just give her his weight and then she wouldn't have to come. That's what I
Right.
think was happening. Um, so yeah, that's what I think was her reasoning is that so that she could just call and check in and not actually come and visit us. Because that's one of the things that the midwives do is the
Right.
first week at home is they come to you, you don't have to go out.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I I was like, well, I don't know if that's gonna be possible. She's like, well, you need it. I'm like, okay, but I don't know if it's gonna be possible. Like, we're in extraordinary circumstances here. Like, it's not
Right.
like
Yeah.
just run to any store and buy one.
Right. Yeah.
So, we get home. I'm still, trying to continue to breastfeeding him. He seems very frustrated and he keeps like pulling off and seeming like so very frustrated. So, we tried that for several hours and I was getting so stressed out. And so I remember calling her. It would have been like the wee hours in the morning. And I called her and said, like, do you have any advice? Like, what can I do? And she was just so, so cold. And she was like, well, I guess I can come in the morning, but I'm just going to wait him and then I'm going to leave.
Yeah. So basically, like, I don't really need to come because that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to help really.
Right. So, and then she was like, well, you know what, just give him formula. Like, despite knowing that like breastfeeding was important to me and like I have absolutely nothing against formula. I think it's such an, like, what would we do without it? Like, I'm grateful that that's an option, but at the same time, like in an early breastfeeding relationship, like you have to be so careful about like what you choose. So, we obviously didn't want our baby to be hungry. So we, gave him the formula, which was fine. So the next morning she shows up, she's on our porch in like a full hazmat suit, like, the gown and the face shield and like, but she has no shoes on. So it made me laugh. She literally walked from her car with no shoes on in a full hazmat suit.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting.
So as she said, she literally weighed him. She wouldn't even touch our baby. She literally had my husband like, you can put him on the scale, you can take him off the scale. She wouldn't even touch him. I still don't know why that was exactly.
Right.
And then she basically said, yeah, he's lost too much weight. You need to see the pediatrician. And then she left. And she offered not one tiny bit of support, no referrals, nothing.
Nothing, no referral to a lactation consultant.
No, nothing. She just weighed him and said, he's lost too much. I'm going to refer you to the pediatrician. And that was it. She never offered anything. She never watched him latch. Nothing.
Nothing. And so how did that feel for you hearing like he's lost too much weight, you need to go to the pediatrician? What was that like?
I was devastated. Like, that was my hardest day probably ever in motherhood, like even over 3 years in. That was my hardest day I've ever had.
Yep. I hear you.
And like, it takes a lot for me to ask for help and then to reach out and actually ask for that help and then be completely shut down was so defeating.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, where did you go from there?
So, I decided, like my mature milk hadn't come in yet. So I was like, well, you know what, I will try to latch him, but I'll pump and we'll give him formula, like anything to get him fed until we can get this sorted out.
Yeah.
But after she did that, something in me switched and I was like, I am done. Like, you treated me poorly, okay, but now you're treating my baby poorly and I'm drawing the line.
Yeah.
So I called the clinic and I told them, don't ever send her here ever again. Like I said, I explained what had happened and I said, I never ever want to see her again. I don't want her involved in any part of my care or my baby's care.
Right.
So I don't want to see her. And at that point, I actually considered like leaving that clinic altogether and just switching to our family doctor. But my husband actually said, because, you get a backup midwife and we had liked her. And so my husband said, well, why don't we see if they'll send her instead? And they agreed that they would send her, even though she wasn't like part of our team. They said that they would send her. And she was so lovely and like so kind. And I asked her about, referral to a lactation consultant and she gave me the referral, no problem. And just gave me the support that I was looking for and like the kindness that I was looking for, honestly, like compassion, I think is what I was missing. And I think that's why I wanted a midwife to begin with. I wanted compassionate care.
Right. Right. Yeah. And we so need that when like you said, right, that we're in the most vulnerable place ever.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I felt like, my birth didn't go the way I had envisioned at all. And now it looked like my breastfeeding journey wasn't going to either.
Yeah.
So like as a new mom, like your accomplishments are weighed off of things that really don't have a lot to do with you. But it's how does your baby sleep? How does your baby eat? And like I couldn't do any of those things to a level that like, postpartum, like hormonal me felt like was good enough.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And then that, those reactions and the way people treat us in that delicate time can have such a massive impact on how we feel we're coping and doing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after that, I was like, I never want to see her again. And I never did see her again after that. So they sent the midwife that I liked for a little while, and then they did try to switch me back to the other midwife that was part of my original team. And
Oh,
she was like asking me like all these questions about like why I didn't want to work with her anymore. And I eventually said, like, are you her boss? Because if you're not, like, I feel like we don't need to have this conversation.
right. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, and after we called the clinic and said like please don't send her here anymore, she blew up our phones. She called us all day. So at this point the baby is like 2 maybe 3 days old, and she called our phones all day. She left messages. She would call, I wouldn't answer, she would just keep calling over and over and over and over again.
Oh, wow. That
Yeah.
must have been so stressful.
Yeah, I thought it was, even at the time I was like, this is literally so immature and ridiculous. Like I have a brand new baby.
Yeah.
Your phone calls and are like the least of my concerns. Like I don't want to talk to you. Like I made it very clear. Like if you want to know why I don't want to work with you, maybe the clinic has to take that up with you, because it's not my responsibility. Like my responsibility is this brand new baby. It's not you. Like
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yes. And how do you feel about the fact that you were able to, because that's also really hard to do. This is the hard part when we have a complaint, that we want to make, whether it's like about the care at the hospital or like with a midwife or, anyone on our care team, that's really hard to do in those early postpartum stages because, we're in such a delicate situation. So how do you feel about the fact that you were able to call and say, please don't send her again, and make your complaint?
I felt like that was like my first test in motherhood. Like it is my job to protect this baby, and I feel like this baby is not getting care that is good enough for him.
Right.
So I, as a mother, like he cannot speak for himself, so I have to. And
Yeah.
so it was not hard for me to be done with it. Like it was not hard for me to call and say I don't want to see her anymore.
Right. Yeah.
I
Good.
feel like my baby deserved better. So like even if it wasn't better for me, even if I couldn't speak for myself to get better, I can at least make sure that he's going to get what he should.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So I feel like in that moment I like really found my power. Like
Right.
I had been through enough, like I had, endured enough, and I wasn't going to let this impact my postpartum experience anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I am really curious about how that impacted, your second baby, like going into that.
I think it's so important to know that it doesn't matter what your size or what your health is that you are deserving of quality care. You are not bothering someone to, have preferences and desires and to be an active part of your own care. Like every single person is deserving of that, and you don't have to be the easiest patient they had all day. That's not your job.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of my second birth, like it could not have impacted it more. Like even just how I went into my first appointment. So my very first appointment, so at that point the midwife that I had liked had switched practices, and so
Right.
I went to that new practice and requested that she be on my team,
Okay.
because I think something that's not talked about is when you have really poor care and you're going to switch, all those relationships that you built, like when you hear people talk about, this midwife delivered all my babies, like I was not going to get that.
Yeah.
So when I saw that she had moved and like wasn't at that practice that I was with, I like jumped on that opportunity to have her be a part of our birth and our pregnancy again, since I had a really good experience with her.
Right.
But the first appointment was totally different. I went into it saying, this is what I need from you as my care provider. I need you to look at my actual health history and not my BMI.
Yeah.
I need you to look at the actual information that you have in front of me and not a number that doesn't say anything about me. If we cannot do that, then this is not the right fit.
Good for you.
And I mean, I can attribute like many years of therapy to that, but
Yeah.
and she said 100%. She said that pregnancy was completely uncomplicated, and what happened to you was completely unacceptable. And like the validation that I got from another medical professional to say that like what happened to me was wrong was so healing for me.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. That validation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that
So
almost like I mean, you can tell me, but did that experience impact whether it was like just in the moment, right? Like in labor and delivery, and even afterwards a little bit, but it sounds like you were pretty confident. But did it impact at all, like your trust in yourself? Like, especially in that moment in labor when, like I said, right, like your brain can play tricks on you. Did it impact your trust in yourself?
Yeah, 100%. Like,
Yeah.
I know my body better than anybody,
Yeah.
and I felt confident that I would make the right choice for my body and my baby. And
Mhm.
so the second time around, I had gestational diabetes. So
Mm.
they obviously want an induction again for that. But I said, I kind of want to go into expected management. I want to, just monitor. And if there's no, health concerns, then, I would like to be allowed to continue on and not have an induction.
Right.
And I had, a care team that supported that plan. Like, and we worked together about, what was safe and what was not safe.
Right.
And I was very, very lucky that I never had any issues with my blood sugar. So they let me continue on, and I carried him to 41 and 1. So he was 8 days overdue.
Oh my gosh, Chelsey.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I was
And your first, how overdue were you with your first? Oh no, no, it was the like that day you went into labor.
Yes.
That
So
was
he
your
was
due
born
date.
at 40 and 2.
Right, right.
Yes.
Got
Yeah.
it. Okay.
So, yeah, so with my second, I did end up being induced because he was so overdue.
Yeah.
But what a difference in experience. I was like, I would like to have wireless monitoring. I would like to be able to move around. I want to have a ball. And my team, my midwife that I had worked with me to make that happen. And it was a completely different experience.
I
And with him, like I chose to go unmedicated because of, the experience I'd had with the epidural the first time.
yeah.
And it was such a different birth. And his birth was, even though it was not what we planned at all, like his
Right.
birth was so incredibly healing because I took so much of my power back in a way that I was not able to do
Yeah.
the first time. And the second time, so we chose to have a doula, and that really helped. Like, it made such a big difference.
Yeah.
Not only with my physical pain, but like with my, the emotional support leading up to it. Especially, we had like a big change in birth plan, and with him being like so overdue, like they really helped me like process all that, and
Yeah.
that made an enormous difference. Um,
Yes, yes. Shout out to doulas.
yes,
Absolutely. We've had Jillian, who runs Birthmark, which is a doula organization. Yes, and I always like share with my clients, like if they've had, for example, traumatic experience or a difficult experience first time around, and they've come to me for processing, and then down the road, if they're thinking about, or if they're having another
yeah,
baby, I'm always like, look for a doula. I'll send you resources. I'll send
yes.
you, referrals because it can be so helpful. It's just another person on your team who's there to take care of you and help you. And like you said, like that made a big difference for your experience.
Right. And I didn't know, how it was going to go. And I didn't know if I would go into freeze or, or fawn again.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to be sure that I had somebody who knew exactly what my preferences were, in situation A, B, C, D. Like, no matter
Yeah.
what happened, like they knew exactly, what I would want so that, if that happened, which it didn't in my second birth,
Yeah.
but if it did, that I would have somebody in my corner who was able to speak up, or at least, able to help me to find those words that if I needed it.
Right. Yes, exactly. And even being able to have those conversations, right? Of like, this is what I look like when I'm, in fawn
Yes.
or in freeze, or you know what I mean? And I think it's just so incredibly helpful for, so if anyone's listening and you're uh maybe pregnant with your first, um think about a doula, ask about a doula, and these questions too, even if you don't have a doula, but thinking about these questions of like, what do I look like when I'm in a lot of pain? What do I look like if I'm in freeze response or fawn response? Like, what's that like for me, or fight response? What does that look like for me? And just kind of exploring that with whoever is going to be in the room, in that moment.
Exactly. I think too, like the first time I focused on so much of like the physical preparation, like I said, the tea and the curb and walking and all
Yeah.
that. The
Yeah.
second time I did not do worry about any physical preparation because I feel confident my body knows what to do. But
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time focusing on mental preparation. Like,
Yeah.
how can I mentally get in a space where my body feels comfortable and safe enough to be able to do this? How can I, and so I spent a lot of my time, on affirmations and, preparing myself in that way. And that was such a game changer for me. I
Yes.
think, you know, some of my, what I would tell someone who, you know, is coming out of a traumatic birth and is maybe on a, you know, subsequent pregnancy, you can go on and have another birth that will be, you know, won't be like your first. And I think it's just about, like, for me, I really had to put the time in to like focus on that healing to try to have a different outcome. But at the same time, also be prepared that if something did happen, how am I going to, what tools do I have to be able to process this?
Yes, absolutely. And right, the after, right? Like the how do I process what just happened? And I wish we talked about this more, even in like just regular like prenatal classes, right? Of like, yeah, of course I need to know what to put in a hospital bag because I've
Yeah.
never done this, right? But also, what do I do to deal with the mental and the emotional processes here that's going on? And then the afterwards, right? Of being able to process that and like, and even if it was like totally smooth and all went well, but just the holy cow, I just did that and brought a baby into the world.
Yeah.
It's so big.
Yeah, and after my second was born, I just kept saying, "We did it, we did it." Like, and I didn't mean like we like you were born. I meant like we beat birth trauma.
Yes, you did, Chelsey. You did. And the first time around too, Chelsey, you did it. I know it didn't look, the way you wanted it to and the way you thought it would, but it sounds like you did all that you could do to get him here safely and keep yourself safe. And you tried and you asked questions and you asked for help and you asked for support and you did all the things that you could do, it sounded like.
Right. And to somebody, you know, who's dealing with birth trauma, like, and, you know, maybe is in the same situation as me where they just got really bad care, like, it is not your fault. Like, you were deserving of quality care. You were deserving for somebody to care for you properly. Like, it doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. Like, that was their job. And if they did not do their job, like, that was not your responsibility. And, you know, you don't have to blame yourself for that.
You're right. Yes, absolutely. And you're not alone, right? Like for anyone listening who has maybe experienced that, you are not alone. Reach out to someone ask around if you don't know where to go, but if you can access a therapist, if you can't, you can reach out to Perinatal Wellbeing Ontario if you're in the province of Ontario. But even if you're not, you can always reach out to me by email and I can look for resources wherever you may be in the world. But you also don't have to process this and deal with the aftermath of that alone. There are people out there that can support you, and you're not alone in this. As we hear on the podcast, there's unfortunately too many stories of birth trauma, but definitely you're not alone.
For sure. And I think, you know, going to therapy was the best choice I ever made.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'd be where I sit today. And I don't think I could have had a second birth like I had if I hadn't done that.
Yeah.
And so I think for anyone, you know, I definitely think, you know, look out resources that are available to you because that has been the biggest difference. And I think that changed, you know, not only my second birth, but like my second postpartum too. Like what a difference. And
Yes.
so I cannot recommend that highly enough. Like find somebody that you click with, find somebody who understands you, find somebody who specializes in birth trauma or postpartum if that's what you need.
Absolutely.
Um, and it's worth the investment in yourself. Maybe you've been through, you know, what I've been through, or maybe you're about to have your first baby. Like, you know, just don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. And if you need help in that area, like, you know, reach out to, you know, a doula if you're able to, or, you know, whatever you can to get additional support. But like, don't ever worry about being a bother to someone whose job it is to care for you. Like, that is their job.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I really appreciate you sharing your story, Chelsey, and coming on to the podcast. And definitely, I think it's going to be so helpful for so many people, whether they're going into their first, labor and delivery experience or coming out of an experience that was traumatic or really difficult, to seek help and to know that they're not alone.
Yeah, and that's my hope is that by sharing my story, that even if it helps one person, like
Yeah.
that is so worth it to me to, you know, have someone maybe have a different experience than what I had.
Absolutely. And so in the show notes, we always have, our resources listed. And again, if you're not in Ontario or Canada, or even North America, still feel free to email me. I will research and find supports for anyone out there. But thank you again, Chelsey. It was so lovely to meet you and talk with you today.
Thank you so much, Christine, for letting me share.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please share this podcast with any of your friends or family members who may benefit from it. If you feel you are experiencing any of the symptoms or issues that we discussed today, please reach out to any one of your supports or go to perinatalwellbeing.ca for more information, blog posts, podcast episodes, and ways to connect with us. Check out our new episode every other Monday.